Jihoon did not leave the next morning. When the sun rose, he was still sitting outside the building where the cubs were being cared for. He had made a decision during the long, sleepless night. Mirai found him there, still in the same position she had left him the evening before. "I told you to leave." "Human," she said, her voice carrying warning. "I heard you," Jihoon replied without looking up, "but I'm not going anywhere without those cubs. They are not your cubs. They are Tariq. They are children who know me as their father," Jihoon said, finally meeting her eyes. "They were dying when I found them. I fed them. I kept them warm. I gave them names. You can't just take that away because of some law." Jung-hee appeared beside his mother, hand resting on his weapon. "Father, let me remove this stubborn human. He does not understand respect." Mirai held up a hand to stop her son. She studied Jihoon's face, looking for something she could not name. "What do you want, human?" "I want to stay with them until they're old enough to choose for themselves. If they want to live as Tariq when they grow up, I'll accept that. But right now they need me." "Impossible," Mirai said. "Humans cannot live among Tariq. You are too weak, too soft. You would not survive a single season. Try me," Jihoon said simply. Before Mirai could respond, Nara emerged from the building. Her expression was troubled. "Clan leader," she said, bowing slightly. "The cubs will not eat. They cry constantly and refuse all food. The smallest one, the female, has grown weaker since yesterday." Jihoon stood up quickly. "Let me see them." "You have no authority here," Jung-hee growled. But Mirai was already walking toward the building. "Show me," she commanded. Inside, the 3 cubs lay on soft furs in a corner of the room. They looked smaller and more fragile than Jihoon remembered. Hana was barely moving while Dohyun and Sumin made weak crying sounds. The moment Jihoon entered the room, all 3 cubs perked up. Hana lifted her head and made a small sound that was clearly meant for him. Dohyun tried to crawl toward him despite his weakness. Jihoon knelt beside them and spoke in gentle Korean words. The cubs responded immediately, becoming more alert and active than they had been since arriving at the village. "They know your voice," Nara observed, wonder in her own voice. "I have never seen cubs bond so strongly with someone outside their species." Jihoon picked up Hana and held her against his chest. She immediately relaxed and began to purr, a sound Tariq cubs made when they felt safe and loved. "They think you are their parent," Mirai said quietly. "This is unusual." Over the following days, a strange arrangement developed. Jihoon was allowed to stay in the village, but only to care for the cubs. He was not welcome at clan meetings or ceremonies. Most of the warriors ignored him, treating him like a useful tool rather than a person. But the cubs thrived under his care. They grew stronger each day, drinking the special milk that Nara prepared for them. Jihoon learned how to properly feed them, how to clean them, and how to keep them warm during the cool nights. He also began to learn the Tariq language. The cubs babbled constantly in their native tongue, and Jihoon picked up words and phrases. Nara helped him understand basic concepts, though she was careful not to be too friendly. Clan law still demanded that humans be treated with suspicion. Dohyun was the first to take his first real steps. He was bigger than his siblings and naturally bold. One morning he stood up on his hind legs and took 3 wobbly steps before falling down. Jihoon cheered, and Dohyun looked so proud that he immediately tried again. Sumin was more interested in exploring than walking. He used his claws to climb everything he could reach: Jihoon's legs, the furniture, even the walls of their den. He was curious about everything and got into trouble constantly. Hana remained the smallest and gentlest of the 3. She preferred to stay close to Jihoon, often falling asleep in his lap while her brothers played. But she was also the smartest. She learned to understand simple human words faster than the others, and she seemed to sense Jihoon's moods. As the weeks passed, Jihoon settled into a routine. He woke before dawn to help prepare the cubs' morning meal. He spent the day teaching them basic skills: how to use their claws, how to recognize different scents, how to move quietly through the forest. In the evenings, he told them stories in Korean, mixing human fairy tales with adventures he made up. The cubs learned both languages naturally. They would chatter in Tariq with other village children, then switch to Korean when talking to Jihoon. This amazed the adult Tariq, who had never seen such linguistic ability in cubs so young. But not everyone was pleased with the arrangement. Jung-hee watched Jihoon constantly, looking for any excuse to challenge him. Other young warriors whispered that having a human in the village brought shame to their clan. He makes them weak, Jung-hee complained to his mother one evening. Real Tarek cubs should be learning to hunt and fight, not listening to soft human stories. Mirai had been watching the cubs too. She saw how they played with other young Tarek, how they learned the traditional games and songs, but she also saw how they ran to Ji-hoon when they were hurt or scared. They are not weak, she said finally. They are different. 1 month after the cubs' arrival in the village, Ji-hoon faced his first real test. The cubs had grown large enough to need meat in their diet. In Tarek culture, this meant their caretaker had to provide fresh game. You want to be their father? Mirai asked, standing in the village center with her arms crossed. Then prove you can provide for them. Bring back meat, or admit that you are not capable of caring for Tarek young. Ji-hoon looked at the dense forests surrounding the village. He had basic survival training from his space service days, but hunting alien animals on an unknown world was far beyond his experience. What kind of meat? He asked. Vorth meat is best for growing cubs, Nara said helpfully. But Vorth are dangerous. They hunt in packs and have killed many Tarek warriors. Ji-hoon remembered the howls he had heard on his first night. Vorth were the wolf-like predators that the Tarek feared. How many warriors usually hunt Vorth? Ji-hoon asked. At least 6, Jung-hee said with a cruel smile. And even then, not all return. But perhaps you think your human weakness is better than Tarek's strength? Ji-hoon looked at the 3 cubs playing near the village center. Do-hyun was showing off his climbing skills to a group of older cubs. Suman was chasing his own tail, making everyone laugh. Hana sat quietly, watching Ji-hoon with large, trusting eyes. I'll bring back Vorth meat, Ji-hoon said. The next morning, Ji-hoon set out alone into the forest. He carried a spear that Nara had given him and a crude knife made from ship metal. It was not much, but it was all he had. The forest was full of life. Colorful birds called from the treetops and small mammals rustled through the undergrowth. Ji-hoon moved as quietly as he could, following animal tracks and looking for signs of Vorth. He found them near midday. A pack of 6 Vorth was drinking from a stream. They looked like wolves, but larger and more muscular. Their fur was dark gray and their teeth were longer than Ji-hoon's fingers. Ji-hoon watched them from hiding, trying to think of a plan. 6 against 1 was impossible odds. But if he was clever, if he used his human intelligence instead of trying to match their strength, he spent the rest of the day preparing. He dug a pit and covered it with branches and leaves. He made simple traps from vines and rocks. He found a narrow canyon where the Vorth would have limited room to maneuver. When the pack returned to the stream at sunset, Ji-hoon was ready. He threw rocks at them from the opposite side of the water, making noise and challenging them. The Vorth, insulted by this small creature's boldness, charged across the stream to attack him. Ji-hoon ran toward his canyon, the pack close behind. The first Vorth fell into his hidden pit. The second got caught in a vine trap that lifted it off the ground. The others followed Ji-hoon into the narrow space between the rocks. In the confined space, the Vorth could not use their numbers effectively. Ji-hoon fought desperately with his spear, using the canyon walls to protect his back. He was cut and bitten, but he kept fighting. When the sun set, 4 Vorth lay dead. The remaining 2 had fled back into the forest. Ji-hoon collapsed against the canyon wall, bleeding and exhausted, but he had won. He had meat for the cubs. Ji-hoon dragged the smallest Vorth back to the village, arriving after midnight. The guards at the village entrance stared in shock. No one had expected him to return alive. Mirai emerged from her dwelling along with half the village. They looked at the dead Vorth, then at Ji-hoon's bloody clothes and determined expression. How many warriors helped you? Jung-hee demanded. None, Ji-hoon said simply. I hunted alone. Old Taewon examined the Vorth carefully. This animal was killed with a spear thrust to the heart. Clean and precise, the work of a skilled hunter. Impossible, another warrior said. Humans are not hunters. This human is, Mirai said quietly. She looked at Ji-hoon with new respect. You have proven you can provide for the cubs. They will eat well tomorrow. The next morning, the cubs enjoyed their first taste of fresh meat. They purred and wrestled with happiness, their bellies full and their adopted father proven worthy. But Ji-hoon knew this was only the beginning. Living among the Tarek would require many more tests. He would have to prove himself again and again, earning his place one day at a time. The red warning lights flashed across the control room of the cargo ship Stellar Dawn. Captain Jihoon gripped his seat as the ship shook violently. Sparks flew from broken panels and the smell of burning metal filled the air. "Engine 3 is gone," shouted his engineer Dong-Soo from across the room. "We're losing power fast." Jihoon's hands moved quickly over the controls, trying to steady the ship. Through the front window he could see a green planet growing larger and larger. They were falling toward it with no way to stop. "All crew to emergency stations," Jihoon called into his radio. "Prepare for crash landing." The ship screamed through the planet's atmosphere. The hull glowed red-hot from the friction. Trees and mountains rushed up to meet them. Jihoon pulled hard on the controls, trying to find a clear place to land. The ship hit the ground with a terrible crash. Metal twisted and broke. The lights went out. Then everything was quiet. Jihoon opened his eyes slowly. His head hurt badly and blood ran down his face. He was hanging upside down in his seat. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow over the destroyed control room. "Dong-Soo," he called out. "Hyunwoo, anyone?" No one answered. Jihoon cut himself free from his harness and fell to what used to be the ceiling. His left arm hurt when he moved it, but it was not broken. He searched through the wreckage, calling for his crew. He found them one by one. Dong-Soo was crushed under a fallen beam. Hyunwoo had hit his head too hard and was not breathing. The others were the same. Jihoon was alone. The reality hit him like a cold wave. His friends were dead. He was stranded on an unknown planet with no way to call for help. The main communications array was destroyed in the crash. Jihoon sat in the ruins of his ship and felt the weight of loneliness. But he knew he could not give up. He had to survive. He had to find a way home. The first thing he did was look for supplies. The cargo hold was badly damaged, but some containers had survived. He found emergency food rations, water purification tablets, and medical supplies. Most importantly, he found the emergency beacon kit. It was damaged but might be repairable. Outside the ship, the alien world was beautiful and terrifying. Tall trees with purple leaves reached toward the sky. Strange birds with 4 wings flew overhead, making sounds he had never heard. The air was thick and humid, filled with the smell of flowers and rotting plants. Jihoon set up a small camp near the ship. He treated his wounds and ate some of the emergency food. The taste was terrible, but it would keep him alive. As night fell, he heard new sounds from the forest. Deep growls and howls that made his hair stand up. He was not alone on this world. The next morning, Jihoon started working on the beacon. The device was complex and many of its parts were broken. He would need time to fix it. Time he might not have. As he worked, he felt like someone was watching him. He looked up from his tools several times but saw nothing. The feeling would not go away. On his 3rd day, they showed themselves. Jihoon was collecting metal from the wreckage when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around and froze. Standing at the edge of the clearing were 3 figures that looked like tigers walking on 2 legs. They were huge, at least 8 feet tall. Orange and black stripes covered their bodies. They wore metal armor and carried weapons that looked both ancient and advanced. Their yellow eyes stared at him with intelligence and something that might have been disgust. The largest one stepped forward. This was clearly their leader. She had scars across her face and arms that spoke of many battles. When she spoke, her voice was deep and rough like a big cat's growl. "Human," she said in accented English. "You do not belong here." Jihoon's heart pounded, but he tried to stay calm. "My ship crashed. I mean no harm. I just want to repair my beacon and leave." The leader's tail switched back and forth like an angry cat. "I am Mirai, leader of the Red Claw clan. This is our territory. Your weak species has no right to walk on our sacred ground." One of the other tiger people stepped forward. This one was younger with fewer scars. "Mother, let me kill him now." "Humans are vermin. They multiply and destroy everything they touch." Mirai held up a hand to stop him. "No, Young-hee. Our laws are clear. We do not kill the helpless, even if they are disgusting creatures." She looked back at Jihoon with cold eyes. "You have 3 days to leave our territory, human. If you are still here after that, we will not be so merciful." The 3 Tarek turned and walked back into the forest. They moved without making a sound, like ghosts made of muscle and fury. Jihoon sat down heavily on a piece of broken metal. His hands were shaking. He had heard stories about the Tarek from other ship captains. They were warriors who lived by honor and strength. They thought humans were weak because humans were smaller and had no claws or fangs. 3 days. He looked at the broken beacon. There was no way he could fix it in 3 days. But what choice did he have? He worked through the day and into the night. The beacon was more damaged than he had first thought. Circuits were burned out. Critical components were missing. He would need to build new parts from scratch using materials from his ship. On the second day, storm clouds gathered in the sky. The wind picked up and the first drops of rain began to fall. Jihoon had seen weather like this before on other worlds. A big storm was coming. He gathered his tools and supplies and looked for shelter. The ship was too damaged to protect him from a serious storm. He needed to find a cave or some other natural shelter. Following a small stream, he found what he was looking for. A cave opening in the side of a hill. It was not very deep, but it would keep him dry. He moved his most important supplies inside and prepared to wait out the storm. As the wind grew stronger and the rain began to fall harder, Jihoon heard something that made his blood freeze. It was coming from deeper in the cave, the sound of crying. The crying of something very young and very afraid. Jihoon picked up his flashlight and slowly walked deeper into the cave. The crying got louder. At the back of the cave, in a small chamber, he found them. 3 tiny Tarek cubs no bigger than house cats. They were orange and black like their adult relatives, but their stripes were still faint. Their eyes were barely open. They were crying because they were hungry and cold and alone. Jihoon looked at them and felt his heart break. Where were their parents? Why were they abandoned in this cave? Outside, the storm began in earnest. Thunder crashed overhead and rain poured down like a waterfall. Jihoon looked at the crying cubs, then at the entrance to the cave where the storm raged. He had a choice to make. He could leave these babies here and focus on fixing his beacon. That would be the smart thing to do. The Tarek had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with humans, but as he looked at the tiny, helpless creatures, he knew he could not abandon them. It was not in his nature to leave children to die, even if they were not human children. Jihoon picked up the smallest cub. It was a female, and she stopped crying when he held her against his chest. The other 2 looked up at him with large, trusting eyes. "I guess we're stuck together now," he said softly. Outside, the storm roared with the fury of an angry planet. Inside the cave, a human held 3 alien babies and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The storm lasted for 3 days. Rain fell like bullets and wind howled through the trees with enough force to knock down the largest trunks. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, followed by thunder that shook the ground. Jihoon sat in the back of the cave with the 3 cubs pressed against him for warmth. They were so small and fragile. The largest was about the size of a human baby, while the smallest could fit in his hands. The cubs were hungry. They cried constantly, their tiny voices echoing off the cave walls. Jihoon had no milk to give them, and they were too young to eat solid food. He tried giving them water mixed with some of his protein bars, but they could barely swallow it. On the second day of the storm, Jihoon made a difficult decision. He tore strips from his shirt and soaked them in the protein water. Then he let the cubs suck on the cloth like a bottle. It was not perfect, but it gave them some nutrition. The smallest cub, the female, was the weakest. She barely moved and felt cold to the touch. Jihoon kept her inside his jacket, sharing his body heat. He talked to her in soft Korean words, the language of his childhood. "Come on, little one," he whispered. "Don't give up. You're stronger than you look." He decided to give them names. The largest cub was male with bold stripes and a strong voice when he cried. Jihoon called him Do-hyun, which meant virtuous and wise. The middle cub was also male, smaller but more active than his brother. He seemed curious about everything, always trying to climb over Jihoon's hands. This one became Suman, meaning excellent and clever. The smallest was the female. She had the palest stripes and the gentlest nature. Even when hungry, she did not cry as loudly as her brothers. Jihoon named her Hana, meaning one or flower. As the storm raged outside, Jihoon wondered about their parents. Adult Tarek would never abandon their young unless something terrible had happened. He thought about what Mireille had said about humans being vermin, who destroyed everything. Maybe the cubs' parents had been killed by humans. Maybe that was why the Tarek hated his species so much. On the third day, the storm finally ended. Jihoon carefully carried the cubs to the cave entrance and looked outside. The forest was transformed. Many trees had fallen, and small rivers ran where there had been dry ground before. The air smelled clean and fresh, but Jihoon had bigger problems than the changed landscape. The cubs were getting weaker. His makeshift feeding method was not enough. They needed real food and they needed it soon. He made a decision that would change everything. He would venture into Tarek territory to find help for the cubs, even if it meant risking his own life. Jihoon made a crude carrier from his jacket and some rope. He put the cubs inside, keeping them close to his body for warmth. Then he set out into the wet forest. Finding the Tarek settlement was easier than he expected. Their paths were well marked, carved into trees and marked with scent signals that even human nose could detect. Jihoon followed the main trail for several hours until he came to a clearing. The Tarek village was impressive. Strong wooden buildings with curved roofs sat among the trees. Gardens of alien vegetables grew in neat rows. Everything was built to accommodate beings much larger than humans. Jihoon hid behind a tree and watched the village. Adult Tarek moved through their daily tasks. Some worked in the gardens, others crafted tools and weapons. Cubs played in the central area, wrestling and chasing each other under the watchful eyes of their mothers. That was when Jihoon saw her. Mirai stood on a platform in the center of the village speaking to a group of warriors. Even from a distance, he could see the authority in her posture and the respect others showed her. Taking a deep breath, Jihoon stepped out from behind the tree and walked toward the village. The first Tarek to see him let out a warning growl that brought the entire settlement to attention. Within seconds, Jihoon was surrounded by armed warriors. Their weapons were pointed at him, and their eyes burned with anger and suspicion. Some called him names in their language that he did not understand but knew were not friendly. "Stop!" Mirai's voice cut through the hostile sounds. She jumped down from her platform and pushed through the crowd. "What are you doing here, human? I told you to leave our territory." Jihoon carefully opened his jacket carrier. The 3 cubs inside were barely moving. Hana's breathing was so weak he could hardly feel it. "Please," Jihoon said, his voice breaking. "They're dying. I found them in a cave during the storm. They need help." The crowd of warriors fell silent. Several stepped closer to look at the cubs. An older female with gray stripes gasped and put her hand to her mouth. "Those are Sona's cubs," the older female said. "I helped deliver them 6 months ago." Mirai's expression changed from anger to something harder to read. "Sona is dead. She was killed in a border fight with the Mountain Claw clan 3 weeks ago. Her mate Koran died defending the cubs. Then why were they abandoned?" Jihoon asked. A younger male warrior, the one Mirai had called Jung-hee, spat on the ground. "Because that is our law. Cubs with no clan to take them become food for the forest. Only the strong survive." Jihoon stared at him in shock. "You left babies to die? Your own species?" "It is our way," Mirai said coldly. "The weak are removed so the strong can thrive. This is how we have survived for thousands of years." Jihoon looked down at the 3 tiny cubs in his arms. Hana had stopped moving altogether. Dohyun and Suman were barely breathing. "Your way is wrong," Jihoon said quietly. "No child should be left to die no matter how weak they seem." Jung-hee snarled and raised his weapon. "How dare you judge our customs, human? You know nothing of strength or honor." "I know about protecting those who cannot protect themselves," Jihoon replied, standing straighter. "That's what strength really means." An old male Tarek with white stripes pushed through the crowd. He moved slowly but with great dignity. Everyone stepped aside for him, even Mirai. "I am Taiwan," the old Tarek said. "I am keeper of the old laws." He looked at Jihoon with ancient wise eyes. "You are caring for cubs that are not your own species." Why? Jihoon thought for a moment. How could he explain human compassion to beings who believed in survival of the fittest? "Because they needed help," he said simply. "Because they're children. Because leaving them to die would make me less than what I want to be." Taiwan nodded slowly. "There is an old law written in the time of our ancestors. It says that any being who protects Tarek young with their own life may claim guest right in our clan." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Mirai looked surprised. "That law has not been used in over a century, Elder." "Laws do not become invalid because they are old," Taiwan said. "This human has kept our cubs alive when we would have let them die. According to our own traditions, he has shown more honor than we have." Jihoon felt a tiny movement in his arms. Hana was stirring. Her small eyes opened and looked up at him. She made a soft sound that might have been recognition. "Please," Jihoon said to the gathered Tarek. "Help them. If your law says I have guest right, then I'm asking for your help to save these cubs." Mirai was quiet for a long moment. The entire village waited for her decision. Finally, she nodded to the older female who had first recognized the cubs. "Nara, take the cubs to your den, feed them and care for them. They will live." Nara gently took the cubs from Jihoon's arms. As she carried them away, Do-hyun opened his eyes and made a small crying sound. He was calling for Jihoon. "The cubs know you," Mirai observed. "They have bonded with you as their parent." Jihoon watched Nara disappear into one of the buildings with his cubs. His cubs. When had he started thinking of them that way? "You may stay in our village tonight," Mirai continued. "But tomorrow you must leave. The cubs will be raised as Tarek in the Tarek way." Jihoon felt his heart break. He had saved the cubs' lives, but now he had to leave them forever. He would go back to his broken ship, fix his beacon, and wait for rescue. The cubs would grow up never knowing the human who had cared for them when they were dying. "I understand," Jihoon said quietly. But as he was led to a guest building, he caught sight of Hana through a window. She was crying, refusing to eat the food Nara offered. She was looking toward the door, as if waiting for someone. She was waiting for him. That night, Jihoon lay on a sleeping mat too small for human comfort and listened to the sounds of the Tarek village. Somewhere in this settlement were 3 cubs who had become more important to him than his own safety. Tomorrow he would leave them. Tonight he would plan how to survive long enough to see them grow up, even if it meant defying an entire clan of warrior aliens. As he watched Do-hyun, Sumin, and Hana play in the morning sun, he knew it would be worth it. They were his family now, and family's 3 months had passed since Jihoon brought down the Vorth. The cubs had grown considerably, now reaching up to his waist when they stood on their hind legs. Their baby fat had melted away, revealing the lean muscle that would make them formidable adults someday. Do-hyun had become the leader of his age group, organizing games and settling disputes among the village cubs. His orange and black stripes had deepened to rich, bold colors. When he practiced with toy weapons, the older warriors nodded approvingly. Sumin had developed into the village's most accomplished climber. He could scale trees faster than cubs twice his age, and had discovered several new routes through the forest canopy. His curiosity sometimes got him into trouble, but his intelligence usually got him out. Hana remained close to Jihoon, but she had found her own special talent. She could sense things that others missed, when storms were coming, when someone was feeling sad, when danger was near. The village elders whispered that she might become a great shaman someday. Jihoon had grown stronger too. Months of Tarek training and forest living had built muscle on his human frame. His reflexes had sharpened, and his understanding of the alien environment had deepened. Most importantly, he had earned grudging respect from many clan members, but not from everyone. Jung-hee still watched Jihoon with hostile eyes. The young warrior had been embarrassed when a human succeeded where he expected failure. Several times he had tried to provoke Jihoon into fights that would give him an excuse to challenge the human openly. The cubs grow soft under human influence. Jung-hee complained to anyone who would listen. They should be learning the warrior's path, not playing gentle games. His opportunity came on a clear morning when Jihoon took the cubs to a meadow outside the village for combat training. The cubs were old enough now to learn basic fighting techniques, and Jihoon had been teaching them human military concepts alongside Tarek methods. The cubs were practicing coordinated attacks, using teamwork instead of individual strength. When Jung-hee emerged from the forest with 3 other young warriors. "What is this shameful display?" Jung-hee demanded, his voice carrying across the meadow. "Tarek fight with honor, 1 against 1. We do not skulk in packs like cowardly Vorth." Jihoon straightened up slowly. The cubs moved to stand behind him, sensing tension in the air. "I'm teaching them strategy," Jihoon said calmly. "Sometimes intelligence is more valuable than strength." "Human weakness disguised as wisdom," Jung-hee spat. He looked at the cubs with disgust. "Look how they hide behind you like frightened prey animals. Real Tarek cubs would stand and fight." Do-hyun stepped forward, his young voice angry. "We are not weak. Papa teaches us to be smart." "Papa," Jung-hee laughed harshly. "This hairless creature is not your father. He is not even worthy to clean a real Tarek's claws." That was too much for Do-hyun. With a snarl, the young cub launched himself at Jung-hee. But the adult warrior was ready. He caught Do-hyun easily and held him dangling in the air. "Stop!" Jihoon moved forward, but the other warriors blocked his path. "Perhaps the cub needs to learn what real strength looks like," Jung-hee said, his claws extending toward Do-hyun's throat. "Let him go," Jihoon said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now. Or what, human? You'll challenge me?" Jung-hee laughed again. "I am twice your size and 10 times your strength. You would die in seconds?" "Maybe," Ji-hoon admitted. But I'll hurt you badly first. And then you'll have to explain to Mirai why you killed cubs and broke guest right. For a moment, the two males stared at each other. Then Young-hee roughly set Do-hyun down. This is not finished, the Tauric warrior said. Someday you will face real danger, human. When that day comes, we will see how much your weakness protects those cubs. Jung-hee and his companions melted back into the forest, leaving Ji-hoon alone with the three upset cubs. Do-hyun was trying not to cry, his pride wounded by being helpless against the adult warrior. So-min and Hana pressed close to Ji-hoon, seeking comfort. Papa, Hana said in her small voice. Why does Jung-hee hate us? Ji-hoon knelt down and gathered all three cubs into his arms. Some people fear what they don't understand. Jung-hee thinks there's only one way to be strong. He doesn't understand that there are many kinds of strength. Will he hurt us? So-min asked. Not while I'm here, Ji-hoon promised. No one will hurt you while I'm alive. It was a promise he would be tested on sooner than he expected. 2 weeks later, Ji-hoon woke before dawn to the sound of Hana whimpering in her sleep. The little female often had dreams, but this was different. She was trembling and her fur was standing on end. Hana, Ji-hoon whispered, gently touching her shoulder. Wake up, little flower. Her eyes opened wide with fear. Papa, something bad is coming. Something very bad. Before Ji-hoon could ask what she meant, a howl echoed across the forest. Then another. And another. Soon the night was filled with the sound of many voices calling to each other. Fourth. A large pack by the sound of it. Ji-hoon quickly woke Do-hyun and So-min. Get dressed. Quietly. Something's wrong. The cubs obeyed without question, having learned to trust their adopted father's instincts. As they prepared, the howls grew closer and more numerous. A warning horn sounded from the village watchtower. Then screams. The attack had begun. Ji-hoon grabbed his spear and knife. Stay close to me. No matter what happens, don't run off alone. They emerged from their dwelling to find chaos. Vorth were pouring into the village from multiple directions, far more than Ji-hoon had ever seen together. They moved with purpose and intelligence, as if someone was directing their attack. Village defenders fought desperately, but they were outnumbered. These Vorth were different from the ones Ji-hoon had faced before. They were larger, more aggressive, and they seemed to have no fear of Tauric weapons. The nursery, Nara screamed from across the village square. They're attacking the nursery. Ji-hoon saw a group of Vorth break away from the main battle and head toward the building where the youngest cubs were kept. Without thinking, he ran toward them. Papa, no! Do-hyun called after him, but Ji-hoon was already moving. He reached the nursery just as the Vorth began breaking down the door. Inside, a dozen cubs younger than his own were crying in terror. Ji-hoon threw his spear, taking down the lead Vorth, but there were 5 more behind it. They turned toward him with yellow eyes full of hunger and rage. Come on! Ji-hoon shouted, drawing his knife. You want to eat children? Try eating me first, the Vorth charged. Ji-hoon met them head-on, using every trick he had learned in his months among the Tauric. He was faster than the wolf creatures expected, and his smaller size let him dodge attacks that would have caught a larger opponent, but there were too many of them. One got past his guard and raked claws across his chest. Another bit deep into his leg. Ji-hoon stumbled, his vision blurring from pain and blood loss. A Vorth leaped at him, jaws wide, to crush his throat. Ji-hoon raised his knife, knowing it would not be enough. The attacking Vorth suddenly screamed and collapsed. Do-hyun stood behind it, his young claws bloody from the surprise attack. So-min and Hana were with him, forming a protective triangle around their fallen father. No one hurts, Papa. Do-hyun roared with all the fury his young voice could manage. The remaining Vorth circled the small family group. They were wary now, having learned that these opponents were more dangerous than they looked. Ji-hoon struggled to his feet, using his spear as a support. He was badly wounded, but he could still fight. He had to fight. His children were depending on him. Together, he told the cubs in Korean, like we practiced. Protect each other. What followed was the most vicious battle of Ji-hoon's life. The cubs fought with desperate courage, their small claws and teeth finding vital spots on the attacking Vorth. Ji-hoon moved with grim determination, placing himself between the predators and his children again and again. So-min used his climbing skills to attack from above, dropping onto Vorth backs and clawing at their eyes. Hana, despite being the smallest, seemed to anticipate every attack and warned the others of danger. Do-hyun fought like a young tiger, his natural warrior instincts finally awakening. When Mirai and her warriors finally fought their way to the nursery, they found a scene they would never forget. 4 Vorth lay dead around a human who could barely stand. 3 cubs, covered in blood but unbroken, stood guard over their adoptive father. The nursery full of young cubs was completely unharmed. Impossible, one of the warriors whispered. A human and 3 cubs defeated 4 adult Vorth? Jihoon collapsed to his knees, his strength finally giving out. But he smiled as Hana pressed against his side, purring to comfort him. Not just any human, Mirai said quietly, looking at Jihoon with something that might have been awe. This human fights like one of us. As the village healer worked to treat Jihoon's wounds, word of the battle spread. The other defenders had managed to drive off the main Vorth pack, but not without losses. 3 warriors had died, and many more were wounded. But the nursery attack had been stopped by a single human and 3 cubs who refused to let their family be destroyed. Jung-hee appeared at the nursery door, his own armor stained with battle. He looked at the dead Vorth, then at Jihoon being bandaged by the healer. I was wrong, he said quietly. About humans. About you. Jihoon looked up at him through pain-hazed eyes. Recovery took time. Jihoon's wounds were deep and the Vorth claws had torn muscle as well as skin. For 2 weeks he could barely walk. The cubs stayed by his side constantly, bringing him food and water, and entertaining him with stories they had learned from other village children. The attack had changed everything in the village. The other Tarek no longer looked at Jihoon as a strange pet or unwelcome guest. They had seen him fight to protect their young, risking his life for cubs that were not even his species. That kind of courage earned respect among the warrior culture. Even more significant was how the village cubs now treated Do-hyun, Sumin, and Hana. The 3 siblings had proven themselves in battle, fighting alongside their adoptive father to save their friends. Other cubs sought them out for games and adventures. They were no longer outcasts raised by a human. They were heroes. The cubs grow strong, Nara observed one evening as she helped change Jihoon's bandages. They learn our ways, but they also keep something special from you. What do you mean? Jihoon asked. They think before they act. Most Tarek cubs would have charged the Vorth without a plan. Your cubs fought smart. They protected the weak instead of just proving their strength. Jihoon watched through the window as his 3 children played with other cubs in the village center. They were teaching the others the teamwork tactics he had shown them, turning combat training into a game. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, he said. As Jihoon healed, news came from other parts of the forest. The Vorth attack on their village had not been isolated. 3 other Tarek settlements had been hit the same night. The attacks were coordinated, planned, and far more vicious than anything the Vorth had attempted before. Something is driving them, Old Taewan explained during a clan meeting that Jihoon was now allowed to attend. Vorth do not naturally hunt in such large packs. They prefer smaller groups. What could make them change their behavior? Mirai asked. Jung-hee, who had become surprisingly supportive of Jihoon since the battle, spoke up. The mountain clans report strange machines in the deep forest. Metal constructs that make loud noises and bright lights. Jihoon felt a chill run through him. Machines? What kind of machines? Large, with tracks like a giant beetle. They cut down trees and dig into the earth. Mining equipment. Jihoon had seen similar machines on other worlds. Someone was strip mining the forest, destroying the natural habitat that the Vorth depended on. Desperate animals were being forced into Tarek territory to find food and shelter. It's not the Vorth's fault, Jihoon said suddenly. They're refugees. Something is destroying their home. The clan meeting fell silent. The idea that Vorth might be victims rather than villains was difficult for the Tarek to accept. Even if that is true, Mirai said carefully, they still threaten our cubs. We cannot simply allow them to attack our villages. No, Jihoon agreed. But maybe we can find another solution. What if we could stop whatever is driving them out of their territory? How? Jung-hee asked. We know nothing about these machines. Jihoon smiled for the first time since the attack. I'm an engineer. If someone is using mining equipment in this forest, I might be able to stop them. 3 days later, a scouting party set out into the deep forest. Mirai led the group, accompanied by Jung-hee, 2 other warriors, and Jihoon. The cubs had wanted to come, but Jihoon refused. This mission was too dangerous for children, even children who had proven themselves in battle. They traveled for 2 days following reports of the mysterious machines. The forest grew stranger as they went deeper. Trees were knocked down in neat rows, and the earth was scarred with deep trenches. The smell of burning fuel hung in the air. On the third day, they found the source. A massive mining operation had been carved out of what was once pristine forest. Huge machines stripped away trees and soil, digging toward some underground resource. Prefabricated buildings housed equipment and living quarters. The whole operation was clearly off-world technology, far more advanced than anything the Tariq possessed. Who would do this? Mirai whispered, staring at the destruction. Jihoon studied the equipment through his binoculars. The machines bore corporate markings he recognized: Stellar Dynamics Corporation, one of the largest mining companies in human space. Humans, he said quietly. My own species is doing this. The implications hit him like a physical blow. Humans were destroying the Tariq homeworld, driving the wildlife into desperate attacks on innocent villages. His people were the real villains in this story. Can you stop them? Young-hee asked. Jihoon continued studying the operation. Maybe. Those machines all run on a central power grid. If I could sabotage the main generator, the whole operation would shut down. It would be heavily guarded, Mirai pointed out. Probably, Jihoon agreed. But I know human security procedures. I might be able to get close enough. They spent the rest of the day observing the mining camp. Jihoon was right. The central generator was guarded, but not heavily. The humans clearly did not expect resistance from the local wildlife. That evening, Jihoon made his move. Using skills learned during his months in the forest, he crept through the camp unseen. The generator building was locked, but Jihoon still had his emergency access codes from his ship. Corporate security protocols were standardized across all human operations. Inside the generator building, Jihoon found exactly what he expected: a fusion power plant providing energy for the entire mining operation. He also found something he did not expect: a computer terminal with access to the operation's files. What he read made his blood boil. Stellar Dynamics had detected valuable mineral deposits under the forest. They had filed the proper paperwork with human authorities, but those papers listed Viridian 7 as uninhabited. Someone had either failed to detect the Tariq or had deliberately ignored their existence. The mining operation was completely legal under human law. The destruction of an entire ecosystem and the displacement of its inhabitants were just acceptable business costs. Jihoon downloaded the files to a portable drive, then began the delicate work of sabotaging the generator. He could not simply destroy it. That would be too obvious and would likely result in a replacement operation. Instead, he reprogrammed the control systems to gradually reduce power output over several weeks. The equipment would become unreliable, mining would become unprofitable, and the company would eventually abandon the site. But as he worked, alarms began blaring throughout the camp. Security lights flooded the area, and armed guards emerged from the buildings. Someone had discovered his infiltration. Jihoon grabbed his data drive and ran for the exit, but human soldiers were already surrounding the building. He was trapped. Come out with your hands visible, a voice called in standard English. You are trespassing on corporate property. Jihoon had no choice. He emerged from the building with his hands raised, the data drive hidden in his jacket. The security chief, a hard-faced woman with military bearing, stared at him in shock. You're human. What the hell are you doing sabotaging our operation? Stopping you from destroying an inhabited world, Jihoon replied. Inhabited? The security chief laughed. The survey showed no intelligent life on this planet. Your surveys were wrong. There are people here. They have families, children, a whole civilization, and your mining is destroying their world. Even if that were true, which I doubt, it's not my problem. I have orders to protect this operation from sabotage. You're under arrest. As the soldiers moved to restrain him, Jihoon heard a sound that made his heart leap and sink at the same time. A deep roar echoed through the forest, followed by several others. The Tariq had come for him. Mirai and her warriors burst from the tree line like avenging spirits. They moved with lethal grace, using the darkness and their natural camouflage to devastating effect. The human soldiers, caught completely off guard, barely had time to raise their weapons. Run! Mirai called to Jihoon in the Tariq language. We cannot hold them for long. Jihoon sprinted toward the forest as chaos erupted behind him. Laser fire lit up the night, answered by the roars and battle cries of the Tariq warriors. He reached the tree line just as reinforcements began pouring out of the camp buildings. The retreat through the forest was a nightmare of pursuit and evasion. The humans had night vision equipment and tracking devices, but the Tariq knew every tree and path. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. They did not stop running until they were well clear of the mining operation. Only then did Jihoon realize that Jung-hee was missing. "Where is he?" Jihoon asked, fear tight in his chest. Mirai's expression was grim. "He stayed behind to cover our escape. He knew it meant capture or death." Jihoon felt sick. Jung-hee had sacrificed himself to save a human, the same human he had once despised. "We have to go back for him," Jihoon said. "It is too late," Mirai replied sadly. "He has chosen the warrior's path. We must honor his sacrifice by completing the mission." As they made their way back toward the village, Jihoon clutched the data drive in his jacket. The information it contained could prove that humans were illegally destroying an inhabited world. But getting it to the right authorities would require reaching his damaged ship and repairing the communications array. It would also mean leaving the cubs, perhaps forever. When they reached the village, Dohyun, Sumin, and Hana were waiting anxiously.